Hey leader, and welcome to another episode of the L3 Leadership Podcast, where we are obsessed with helping you grow to your maximum potential and to maximize the impact of your leadership. My name is Doug Smith, and I am your host. And if you are new to the podcast, welcome. I'm so glad that you're here, and I hope that you enjoy the content and become a subscriber. If you've been listening to the podcast for a while and it's added value to your life, it would mean the world to me if you'd leave us a rating and review on whatever app you listen to podcasts through. That really does help us to grow our audience and reach more leaders, so thank you in advance for that. Well, leader, in this week's episode, you're going to be hearing me be interviewed by my friends Tom O'Boyle and Nate Devlin on their podcast, which is called the Scattered Seeds Podcast. If you haven't subscribed to it, I encourage you to check it out. And in our conversation, you're going to hear me share my story. I talk about the importance of having good friends. I share what we're up to at Light of Life and what's happening in the city of Pittsburgh as it relates to homelessness and so much more. I think it's going to add a ton of value to your life, so let's dive right in. Enjoy.
You're listening to the Scattered Seeds Podcast, where every life has a story.
To hear somebody's story and to hear how the story of Christ and the gospel intersects with somebody's life so that their story is taken up into the story of Christ. There's no better story to hear.
It's powerful when God has brought you through something, because not only can you go, this is what God has brought me through, maybe it can touch that one person.
I was a week away from leaving my career in the media and about to embark on the communications job, which I now occupy here at the church. Never underestimate the sovereignty of God.
From dealing drugs to feeding hundreds, today's guest has gone from being a bad influence to someone whom the Lord is using to reach others daily. Doug Smith is currently the Assistant Executive Director of Pittsburgh's Light of Life mission, working with past guest Jarrell Gilliam and Hutch to bring help to the homeless of the greater Pittsburgh area. So join Tom, Nate, and Doug as they explore the path the Lord has led him on and the slap in the face that helped him find it. Welcome back to the Scattered Seeds Podcast, where every life has a story.
So, Doug, welcome to the Scattered Seeds Podcast. It's great to see you.
Honored to be here. I've been following you guys for a while, so love the work that you do.
Oh, thank you.
Fellow podcasters, I always love talking shop with you guys.
What's the name of your podcast?
The L3 Leadership Podcast.
L3 Leadership.
Yeah.
What are the three L's?
That's what everyone always asks. Yeah, learn, launch, lead. So we believe leaders should be in a continual cycle of those three things: learning, launching whatever's in their heart, and then ultimately leading wherever they are.
Yeah. Is that an independent organization that you started? Or?
It is, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I started around 2014.
Okay. Any collaboration with Pittsburgh Leadership Foundation?
Yeah, so it's actually, I guess how L3 started, and I can share more of my story later, but basically my life was headed nowhere really, really fast. I was a drug dealer on my way to being a drug addict, alcoholic. My life turns around through Christ. I ended up on staff at this church, Victory Family Church in Cranberry. Pastor Larry Betancourt, I don't know if you know him through your Geneva connections, but...
I know that name. I could trace it, I'm sure, but it's a very familiar name.
Yeah, he handed me a John Maxwell CD, and I never knew there was such thing as personal development, personal growth, and I listened to it, and I felt like I was Neo in the Matrix. I transcribed the entire lesson. I said, give me everything you got. And so this passion for personal development just went off in me, and for years, literally 2 or 3 hours a night, I'd be listening to personal development, and eventually got to a place where it's like, hey, I want to start doing for others what John Maxwell and others have done for me. 2012, I went through the Pittsburgh Leadership Foundation Collaborative. It was the first time I heard, for those listening, if you're not familiar, Reed Carpenter and Sam Shoemaker, the whole vision of Pittsburgh being one day more famous for God than steel. Mm-hmm. And every time I would get around that, my heart would just explode with vision. And so much so that I called Reed Carpenter and I said, Reed, I feel called to do for my generation what you did for yours. What should I do? And he just said, Doug, just start gathering people and see what the Holy Spirit does. And so there was 20 of us on Mount Washington. We prayed over the city, and I said, hey, I don't know what it's going to look like, but we're going to develop leaders in our city, and we believe if we'll invest in develop leaders in all sectors, that we can ultimately win the city for Christ. And so that was almost 10 years ago now. And so we have a podcast that has over 400 episodes. We do mastermind groups. We've had a one-day conference a few years. And that's all a side project along with, full-time job. And
at Endocia, we help transform visions into results. What does that mean? We often work with companies who are doing amazing things that have incredible products and services, but fail to communicate what they do properly and market themselves effectively. We passionately serve entrepreneurs, business leaders, and visionaries to see what's in their heart and their visions for the future come to life. We do that by providing fractional marketing leadership and creative execution all in one. That's what we call VCMO. With VCMO, you get a marketing director and a team of creative professionals to help execute all of your marketing needs, all for one monthly cost. How do we do all this? We do it 3 ways. Number 1, we get your vision. We get excited about your mission and your trajectory as a company and come alongside to see you go further, faster. 2, we have a team of talented strategists and creatives to get all of the work done. And 3, we flat out work freaking hard for you and your company. Reach out today. Let's start a conversation.
So that was the short story of the long arc of your life. So let's get into the details.
Yeah. So I grew up in Wexford, went to North Allegheny, and I had a pretty normal family life, I'd say, till 6th or 7th grade. And 2 significant things happened at that point. One is I got invited to go to a Baptist camp, which still exists, Slippery Rock Baptist Camp, right off the Slippery Rock exit. And for the first time I heard the gospel, my camp counselor brought me into the cabin and said, "Doug, do you want to make Jesus Christ the Lord of your life?" And I said, yes. Knelt down right there and prayed and invited Christ into my life. And so instantly felt called into ministry. I wanted to be a pastor. This was in 7th grade. Wow. And they started bringing me to a church here in Crafton called Middletown Road Baptist Church. And I went to a church picnic right after that camp, saw this beautiful girl, and I said, hey, I think I could go to this church every week. Yeah. And so I did. I had a crush on it. It turns out it was the pastor's daughter. Oh. And I joined the choir. I mean, because she played the piano, and I could see her forehead sticking out from over the piano. So, anything I could do to be around her. But the pastor started mentoring me, and it was a beautiful thing. But at the same time, my mom got diagnosed with a rare nerve disease. If you've ever had your feet fall asleep or have pins and needles, she started having that 24 hours a day.
Neuropathy? Or what?
Polyneuropathy. I'm not exactly sure what the term is, but it wasn't MS. A lot of people ask that, but the doctors ultimately didn't know how to treat it. So she ended up using a walker, ultimately ended up in a wheelchair, and really ended up in bed most of her life. So dramatically shifted the way our family did family. I went from having family nights every week to my dad working 2 jobs. He was a bus driver in our school district. He would drive for Giant Eagle trucks on the weekend. So he was never home. My mom was in bed all the time. So I had no boundaries as a 13-year-old, which as a 13-year-old, it's like the greatest thing ever, But summer of 8th grade, I remember being in the woods with a bunch of friends. This kid pulls out a pipe, and I'm like, oh man, this is what they tell you about in school. That's when I first started doing drugs. And by the end of that summer, fell totally away from God. Wanted nothing to do with him, and basically stopped trying in school, determined that I would never amount to anything. Had to go to summer school every single year just to get to the next grade. In 9th grade, I found out that my mom...
Pipe, was it crack?
No. Oh, thank God, no. But it was just marijuana. But that's what I started with. But then I found out my mom had these pills called Oxycontins, and so it's basically synthetic heroin, and I found out there was a market for those. So I would steal pills from my mom and sell them in our high school, got into acid, and basically was just partying all throughout high school. Fast forward to my senior year, my mom had gotten so ill, October 2002, that she ended up passing away. And when she passed away, this was so strange to me. I grieved, but not in the sense that she was gone. I was actually relieved because the last 6 months of her life were horrible. I saw her suffer unimaginable things. And so when she passed, what did bother me and what I did grieve was I didn't know she had a relationship with Christ. But I didn't know why that bothered me because I didn't care at all about Christ. But every night I'm getting drunk, I'm getting high, and my head would hit the pillow at night, and these thoughts would just come to me like, you're going to be 70 years old one day and still be being tormented by the fact of you not knowing if your mom knows Christ. And so that torments me for about 3 months. And then one Saturday morning, literally out of nowhere, this woman calls me. It turns out I'm related to her. She's a lot older than me. I had no relationship with her. I was 17 years old. And she called me and she said, Doug, I really felt like the Lord put you on my heart this morning. And he wanted me to let you know that I was actually a nurse in the hospital with your mom. And I led your mom into a relationship with Christ a few weeks before she passed. Wow. And I think God wants you to know that.
She's related to you?
She's related to me.
In what way?
To this day, I don't know. I think she's my cousin. So we're friends on Facebook. I thank her every year because that phone call, when she said that, my knees hit the ground. I don't remember anything else she said. Tears going down my face. And I just said, God, whatever you want for the rest of my life, I'm yours.
How old were you then?
I was 17. That was the first time for me that I learned that, one, God loved me so much that he would have someone call me. Two, he loved my mom so much. I know a lot of us pray for loved ones who don't know Christ, and the reality is even when people lose people and they're not sure, I tell them, listen, God loved that person so much. Like, God loved my mom so much that he sent probably so many people her path, and for whatever reason, it was this woman, Chrissy, who got the opportunity to lead her to Christ. And so that was the turning point for me. And then 2 weeks later, again, another God moment, got invited by a girl to a Bible study. This Bible study was started by a mom in our high school. I found out she was a mom, just had a passion. She felt like God led her to start this Bible study 5 years before I went there, and she was scared to death to start it. She ends up doing it. 150 kids were going to this Bible study from North Allegheny every single week. They actually had to reset the foundation of their house because of how many kids were going. And it was just a mom with a passion for Christ. So I walk downstairs, I see a beautiful girl sitting on the couch, and I thought, I'm going to Bible study every week. And so I don't know how you guys are.
It wasn't the same beautiful
It wasn't
girl.
this. No, things didn't work out with the pastor's daughter.
right,
but
right.
but I did. So I saw this beautiful girl. Turns out it was the mother's daughter. I went home.
for daughters, I guess.
I know, but I do wonder. I'm like, how many men actually follow God because of a beautiful woman they saw somewhere that follow God? Probably a lot.
Probably a lot.
Yeah, right.
So to wrap up the story, basically, I walked home from that Bible study, reignited a fire for God in me, and I went home that night and I told my high school friends, one, I called my shot. I said, I met the woman I'm going to marry, which was the girl on the couch. Spoiler alert, that's my wife today.
Wow.
My wife, she left Bible study that night. She went up to her mom and she said, I can't believe Doug came to our Bible study tonight. He's one of the most influential kids in our school, but he uses all of his influence for drugs, alcohol, partying, etc. If he ever got a hold of God, I think he could change the world. And for whatever reason, her mom felt led to start bringing me over their house for family dinners. Her dad is the dean of, or was, he just retired, was the dean of admission at Carnegie Mellon University for 45 years. And they became a family that basically adopted me as a 17-year-old and showed me an entirely different way of life. They showed me what a godly family looked like. They showed me what a godly father and a husband looked like. They brought me to Victory Family Church, where I ended up interning, and that was really the turning point, this family taking an interest. And I guess the last thing I'll say here is, I was sharing my story with actually my tax advisor who went to high school with me, and he said, Doug, I've known you for a long time. How many people do you think that were in your situation actually make it out? And I'm an optimist by nature. I'm like 50%. And he said, I would probably guess it's more like 5.
Yeah.
And man, that broke my heart. And I had a younger sister who was living the same lifestyle that I did. She kept going down the same path. She ends up being a heroin addict, unfortunately. And again, this is more the Light of Life story, but she ends up being a heroin addict, came into our program at Light of Life, ends up giving her life to Christ at Light of Life, which is amazing. But we lost my sister to an overdose in 2019, which is devastating. But what made her go that way and me get out? The reality is, one, God, obviously, getting a hold of God early. But two, it was other people showing me another way. And I think that's the number one way that kids need to get out. When I think about kids in hard circumstances, they just don't have someone in to show them another way or model another way of life. And, for me, it was my mother-in-law and father-in-law. It was my youth pastor. And without those three people, I would have probably continued to go down the same path.
How did you kick the substance? So did you have to go to rehab, or did you just cold turkey? Or
No, it wasn't cold turkey. Right after I graduated, I went on a senior trip where I basically got high and drunk every day for 14 days and then went to a church camp the week after. And that's when I would say I really rededicated my life to Christ. I heard about an internship at this church, and I thought, oh man, if I'm working at a church, like Laura, my wife, who wasn't my wife at the time, I'm like, she's going to be super impressed. She's going to think that's like the hottest thing ever.
Yeah.
But she didn't. I didn't even know what an internship was. Like, again, barely graduated high school. Start working at this church, serving youth ministry during the week and on weekends. But on Saturday nights, I'm going down to Pitt and getting drunk and high. My house was the party house. Dad was rarely home, and my mom was obviously gone at this time. So I'm living this double standard lifestyle for about 9 months into the internship, and no one knows. Wow. And I'm having a party at my house, and there was this kid that was super annoying to me at the time, but he always wanted to hang out with me. And so I said, you can come over to my house. Well, I was having a party that night. I told my friends that were partying, because I'm like, I'm going to reach them for Christ. Hey, this kid from church is coming over. While he comes over, I'm church Doug. But as soon as he's gone, it's on. This kid comes over. My friends are getting high and drunk on my front porch. He comes in, he goes past them, sees me, grabs me legitimately by the shirt, pulls me into my mom's bathroom, physically slaps me in the face. It says, yeah, no joke.
I like this kid.
Yeah, slaps me in the face and said, what are you doing? And I said, well, what do you mean, what am I doing? Those are my friends. I'm going to reach them for Christ. I don't do what they do.
Yeah.
And he said, Doug, I know exactly what you're doing. I know the lifestyle you're living. Wow. And you have 3 days to tell Pastor Larry, who was leading the internship. And he said, if you don't, I will. And he left. And I wanted to kill this kid.
Wow.
And not only was I angry, I was deeply saddened. And I actually cried the entire weekend because for the first time in my life, I actually felt like God had a plan for my life. I felt like I had potential and could actually do something with my life. And I thought, as soon as I admit this, I'm done for. They're going to kick me out of the church, and I'm just going to keep going down the same path. I go to the church 3 days later. I meet with a youth pastor. I couldn't even look him in the eye. I'm crying. I stutter out the lifestyle I've been living. And I looked up, and I expected him to say, "Get out." Yeah. Instead, he had a huge smile on his face. And he said, my nickname then was Bubba. But he said, "Bubba, I love you, and I believe in you." And he said, the Bible says a righteous man falls down 7 times but gets back up again. Get back up again. But then he qualified. He said, "But I can't continue to let you lead and live the lifestyle you're living, so you have a choice to make. So what are you going to do?" That was the draw a line in the sand for me. That was enough for me. And I met with all my high school friends, and I said, "You're not going to see me at parties anymore. I'm not having any more parties. If you want to go to coffee or movies, great." No one ever did. So there was a period of separation that I had to separate. In AA, they talk about new places, people, and things. That's what I had to do. And so I had some lonely nights, but the beautiful thing is God ended up bringing some of my best friends in the world into my life. And I remember meeting with the kid that slapped me. Never forget this. And I said, "Hey, I hated you, but I think you may have changed my life, and I want to thank you for what you did." I told him what I did with my friends, and he shared a quote with me that I share all the time, changed my life. He said, "Doug, let me tell you something about friends. Friends love you the way that you are, but real friends love you enough not to let you stay where you are." And that's when it hit me. My high school friends were my boys, right? But they were my boys if I was on my way to being an alcoholic. But a real friend was willing to literally grab me by the collar, slap me in the face, and say, "You're better than this." And if it weren't for him and the grace that a youth pastor showed me, I would have been back on that slippery slope. So that was kind of the turning point for me as far as saying, I'm done with all of this stuff. I'm not looking back. And I never did.
You stay in touch with him, the slapper?
Oh, yeah. Yep, I thank him. Gratitude's a really big practice.
Still slap you? Or?
No, he lives far away, thankfully. Yes. Yeah. I don't let him know anything that's going on in my life. Or I keep him at a distance.
he might enforce change.
That's right. Yeah, I learned my lesson there.
Wow. So that's high school. What happens after high school? Do you go to college?
Yeah, so my father-in-law, I don't know if I would have gone to college. He, CMU guy. Oh, my mother-in-law, pretty soon after I started attending Bible study, got diagnosed with brain cancer. It was lung cancer that went to her brain, had a tumor. And so that was a whole journey that we went through with her family, and we lost her in 2004. I think I just started going to community college because that was the only option I had. And Mike was really big in my role in my life. But at the funeral, all these people were here, and the president of Carnegie Mellon's there, and he gives a speech and he thanks me. And he said, "Doug, I just want to thank you for your part in our family. Hopefully I can talk you into going to CMU one day." I'm like, I barely graduated high school. I can go to CMU. I'm like, this is it. I'm going to go to Carnegie Mellon. What do I need to do? I talked to my wife's brother, and he's like, "Just talk to Dad. Ask him." So he's shoveling snow one day, and of course, I'm trying to be a future in-law and help. And I just said, "Hey, Mike, what do I need to do to get into Carnegie Mellon?" And he just looked at me and laughed and said, "I think you should apply somewhere else." So he broke all of my dreams, and that was the end of that. But I would have never survived. So I went to community college for 2 years, which I loved, and then went to Robert Morris, ended up on staff at Victory Family Church and youth ministry afterwards, and then had an identity crisis in the middle of that, which ultimately led me to going to Light of Life, where I've been for 14 years, and I'm happy to dive into any of those
let's
stories.
go into the identity crisis.
Yeah, really.
It sounds like
what was that?
So this was right after graduating high school?
No, so this is...
I mean,
I'm
youth
sorry,
ministry will
graduating
do
college.
that to you.
Yes. So I'm in youth ministry, young 20-something in ministry. What did I want to be? A mega church pastor.
What was your degree in at Robert Morris?
Business. Yeah.
Okay.
Just as general as possible.
Okay.
And I wanted to be the pastor of a mega church.
Why?
For me, it was about influence. My hero at that time was John Maxwell.
Yeah.
I'm seeing what John's doing. I want to make a big impact with my life. If I had to summarize it, if I'm able to speak to, thousands of people every week, that's how I can make the biggest difference.
Yeah.
I think especially in today's world, you look on social media, now what do kids want to be? YouTube influencers. And yeah, there's a money element to that, but I think more than anything, people want to make an impact. I guess I'll just share openly. I'll say this. So there was a hire of someone over me, and I didn't necessarily get along with this person. It went from one pastor who I was under, Larry Betancourt, who was like, "Hey, you can do anything," to a leader that I felt like the impact he had on me was, "You can't do anything, you're worthless." So I went back to almost the beginning of where I was in high school.
Okay. So you'd been there a couple years.
Been there a couple years. And I loved it. And then I call it the grace lifting. For about 2 years, I really just didn't enjoy it anymore. I would walk around the offices with my head down, not excited, no passion. I end up leaving the organization because Larry asks me to help him plant a church, Champion Life Church in Chippewa, which is still there today. So we leave.
Where in Chippewa?
We started in Black Hawk High School is where we started.
Okay, yep. Mm-hmm.
So I went there and he's like, hey, I want you to come with me, but I can't pay you. And so I was looking for a job in business, etc. And the identity crisis was I went from being on staff at a big church to a startup with no people to making money to not making money.
How old were you then?
26, 27.
Okay. Were you married yet?
About to get married, yes.
So you're about to get married. You leave a steady job with income and an influential church in the community to obscurity with no income.
Yep.
So big confidence boost.
Yeah.
Okay.
So looking for a job in corporate, had a consulting gig lined up, but they're like, hey, we can't start you for 4 months. I walk out, just God moments, again, going back through my story. I walk out of this interview. It was 7:30 a.m. from the consultant company at Panera Bread in Monroeville. My phone rings. It was a woman that went to Victory. She was on staff at Light of Life. She was the development director at the time. And she said, Doug, I know you're looking for a job. A position at Light of Life just opened up for the volunteer coordinator. Why don't you come work for Light of Life for a year, and then you can go work on the church when they can pay you? I ended up interviewing, got the job, and for around 6 months, I'm working at Light of Life. I'm doing this church thing, and I'm just depressed because I'm thinking, I see no path in me making an impact. I actually told my friend this, I'm ashamed of that I said it this way, but because my dream was to work in a mega church, I said, man, what am I doing working at a homeless shelter? But by the end of that first year, I had totally fallen in love with Light of Life, and I fell in love with the work that we do, and I fell in love with the North Side. I fell in love with our city. So about a year into my time at Light of Life, I started getting that spark back, and I was a horrible volunteer coordinator. Let me just be clear, like the worst. I have no administrative capacity, but
you're all vision.
Yeah. Well, my boss said, hey, you're really good with people.
Yeah.
Why don't you get into fundraising? And they threw me into fundraising, and now I've been there for 14 years, ended up being the development director. But that was really a game changer for me. At the same time, I mentioned my sister earlier. A year into my time at Light of Life, my sister came to me. She was 5 months pregnant with my nephew, and she said, I need help. And I said, what do you mean you need help? And she said, I'm a heroin addict. Wow. And I had heard rumors that she had done that, and I had no idea what to do because I had never gotten into that. And so I reached out to our program director, and for 9 years, Light of Life walked me, my family, and my sister through her addiction. She was homeless twice, had 2 kids in that time period, in our program 3 different times. Third time she was in our program, rededicated her life to Christ, as I mentioned, and was clean for 18 months, which was amazing. I felt like I had my sister back for the first time in 15 years.
Wow.
But like I said, unfortunately, she ended up relapsing, and she had overdosed 32 times in her lifetime, which is crazy. And that 33rd time, we lost her. But, I guess a few takeaways from that as I share that is, one, Mark Batterson always says, God wants you to get where God wants you to go more than you want to get where God wants you to go. And I had no idea that on the other side of Light of Life would be my sister being helped by our program and giving her life to Christ. I had no idea that I had fundraising ability in me. I had no idea that one day I'd be helping lead the organization overall. And ultimately, this will just be the identity piece. A few years ago, I felt like I really realized that dream I had of being a lead pastor, God fulfilled in me working at Light of Life. Light of Life, we're connected with 300 churches. Instead of being at one church, I feel like I could see what God's doing all over the body of Christ in Pittsburgh. I'm connected in the business world. I'm connected in the government world. It's beautiful, but I would have never seen that. And then with my sister, if you would have told me at any point in my life that I would know someone, let alone a family member, who would ever be in need of a homeless shelter, I would have never believed you. And what I've come to learn through my sister's story, and now 14 years of meeting the men and women who walk through our doors daily, is we're all 1 or 2 decisions away from being the exact same place these men and women are at. We're all 1 or 2 paychecks away from being in the same place. And when people realize that, it changes everything. And I tell people, if you had to go through a fraction of what some of these men and women have had to go through, you'd be lucky to be in the same position that they're in. And so we really encourage people to get to know people's story. The work we do is life or death, right? Yes, we have stories of testimonies. We're not going to post all of the people we lose on a YouTube post. You're going to see stories of transformation. We have plenty, and God's done amazing things. But we also lose people all the time, which is devastating. We always say we stand on the gates of hell, and as long as someone's breathing when they walk through our doors, there's hope. And then lastly, the faith-based element of what we do, because Christ is the center of what we do, my sister is now in my future and not just in my past. And so even when we lose in the natural at Light of Life, we still win eternally with Christ. And so it's just cool how God kind of wrote that whole story and brought it all together.
I found that the people that are attracted to Light of Life have had that kind of very dramatic turning point in their lives where they really see both the problems and the victory with great clarity, right?
Yeah.
Because Jarrell Gilliam was a past guest on the podcast. You used Jarrell's story and sermons.
Yeah, he and I also did the Pittsburgh Leadership Foundation. We were in the same cohort.
Oh, that's awesome.
Oh, you were? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Jarrell's great. I remember some of the stories he told on our podcast. It just seems to me that the people that are attracted to it have a very acute understanding of standing at the gates of hell, as you just explained it, that both empowers them and gives them empathy for the kinds of situations that people face.
Yeah.
Does that make sense to you?
Oh, for sure. The real heroes of Light of Life are our program staff, the things that they do on a day in and day out basis. But I would say no matter what position someone has at the Light of Life, it's a calling. So a similar, church ministry, if you're not called to it, you're never going to last.
Right.
And especially the work that we do. When I look at our program staff, I mean, the things that they deal with on a daily basis, you could pay them $5 million a year, but if they're not called, they're not going to do it. And so I'm just so grateful that we have people that God taps on the shoulder and say, I need you here.
Yeah.
And it's been amazing to see them do the work.
Right.
Do you feel like you're now in the place that God made you to be?
Yeah. So when I went through that identity crisis, one thing that was helpful is my pastor said, Doug, never put a period where God puts a comma. For me, why did I have an identity crisis? It's because I was like, I'm going to be a mega church pastor. That's it. There's no other option. That's it.
Right.
That's why I experienced disappointment. From that transition in my life, I've lived loosely with open arms of saying, God, I'm very content with where you have me now, but if you're calling me to something else, just make that clear. I'm never again going to say, oh, I'm going to be the executive director one day of Light of Life, or I'm going to do this with L3 leadership. Like, okay, God's been faithful enough in my journey and written a beautiful enough story that I just trust him of, hey, I'm where I'm at supposed to be right now, but if you want me somewhere else tomorrow, just let me know.
Yeah. But you really like the work you're doing.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
Love it. Yeah.
So what's the next big project for Light of Life?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Jarrell, if you've had him on the show, he has no lack of vision. That is for sure. That man is a visionary through and through. So right now, the thing we're focused on is historically, I would say at Light of Life, we've been more reactive. And what I mean by that is, we've been around for 70 years and we would wait for people to come to us, say, you need food, come on in, you need shelter. What we haven't done as much of is being proactive in helping prevent homelessness. Policy plays a part, but then also just preventative. So we've started a lot of outreach services over the last few years. So we have a food pantry that's now providing over 10,000 meals a week, serving 167 families on average and over 60 other partner agencies. We have a donation center that literally has served over 40,000 people this year already by providing in-kind items. And then we just acquired a furniture bank. So now we can actually furnish a home for a family in need for $275. It's incredible. So our next big project is we're actually about to sign a lease on an outreach hub that's really, really close to our current location. That's huge. And so we'll be able to bring all of those outreach services under one roof. That'll be a big thing. And then I think the other thing we're looking into is just how can we expand housing for people in need, whether that's buying additional transitional housing, whether it's finding an old building or an old church that someone may have and saying, hey, could you turn this into a shelter and running it? So we're really looking at how can we expand our services beyond, the two buildings we built in our capital campaign, I would say were the foundation for what we needed to do the work we do. And now we can really focus on scaling and expanding our thumbprint beyond just the north side.
Yeah, Jarrell had a piece in the Post-Gazette over the summer talking about Pittsburgh being at a critical juncture. We must decide whether to prioritize solutions that transition individuals out of homelessness or go the way of San Francisco and the Tenderloin and that kind of thing. And I think he's right. I cycle a lot, and I've been cycling a lot this past summer with my son who just moved back from California here. We would usually cycle out to McKeesport, but some days we would go the other direction. And the number of homeless encampments that are in Pittsburgh, you would pass 3 to 4 encampments of 10, 20, 30 people, some of which had bars right in front. I remember one particular tent that we passed that literally had alcohol outside on a stand. And it was shocking to me. And so when I read that piece, I thought, he's right. I mean, we might be on the cusp of something. Can you explain for our listeners, because everybody sees that, and I think for the typical suburban person in the North Hills or the South Hills, they encounter it and they're fearful of it. They say, what is going on? This seems like chaos unleashed. What's going on right now in the city of Pittsburgh, and what are ways that it could be fixed? Yeah,
so homelessness is very, very complex, a lot more complex than people think. Again, I think most people think, they just made bad decisions, or, oh, they're just a drug addict. But the reality is, Jarrell took one of the city council members out for outing with our outreach team. And so our outreach team goes out to those living in camps to build relationships. And I think they ran into 5 or 6 individuals. And literally the solution that would be needed to help that person get out of homelessness was different for every single one. And they need teams around them and resources around them. So I think that's one, understanding that's complex, but even how people get there. Do you know, Jarrell often uses this example that I love of Niagara Falls. If you looked at Niagara Falls and just said, hey, how would we ever stop Niagara Falls from flowing? You'd say it's impossible. There's too much force. But in the 1800s, it actually did stop flowing. And it's because if you went upstream, the tributaries, I believe, froze up and basically stopped all of the flow. And so what we say is if you go upstream from homelessness, of what's actually causing it, those issues need dealt with. In 2022, I believe the country had over 100,000 opioid overdose deaths through the year. So that's a huge issue. You have lack of affordable housing. In Allegheny County, for every 100 families looking for housing, there's only 37 units available that are affordable. And so that's a huge, huge issue. You have inflation and just everything going on. Again, most people are 1 or 2 paychecks away from having experienced homelessness. You have an eviction rate. On average, there's 40 evictions a day in Allegheny County. That's over 200 a week. And then you have, I didn't even mention mental health. And the mental health thing, even post-COVID, we've seen go to another level. We think it's because of a lot of the fentanyl and different things that they're putting into drugs. We're just seeing mental health issues that we've never seen before. And to be honest with you, I don't think many organizations, including psychological hospitals, et cetera, are equipped to actually handle. You have all these different issues coming together, causing people to experience homelessness. I would say as far as the encampments and things in our city, so one, we have to deal with all of those issues, and hopefully we can do more on the preventative side from stopping the flow of people experiencing homelessness. And then just as far as what we can do in our city, the best way I heard it described, there was this guy, he was an executive director of a mission in San Antonio, and he was on one of the news stations, and this was when Trump was president in 2016. I guess Trump saw him, and he said, let's see if we can hire that guy. The White House contacts him and says, hey, can you write a white paper on how to solve homelessness nationally by tomorrow night at 6 p.m.? The guy does it. He gets hired by Trump for a period of time, and then the transition worked for Biden for a period of time, and that ultimately didn't work out well for him, so he left. His conclusion was, I don't think you can really make a huge impact on this through politics, so he's actually created a documentary that we are just showing private screenings of. Did you get the invite? Yeah, so he partnered up in Hollywood, and there's actually a documentary that's phenomenal, and a movie coming out called No Address. And I'd really recommend, if you want to kind of get on the documentary side, if you want a real understanding of, hey, what's actually happening in homelessness in our country and what are solutions that the real missions and other organizations are doing to solve it, you need to see this. And again, we have several private screenings coming up. I think it'll be available to the world in spring or summer of next year. The movie's coming out in February. That's more of a side note. But he made this comment to me once. He said, Doug, if your city is making it easier to get high and harder to get treatment, you're headed in the wrong direction, and you're going to end up like in LA, Philly, San Francisco, et cetera. If your city is making it harder to get high and easier to get treatment, you're heading in the right direction. And that's where, Jarrell would say, I think in the city of Pittsburgh specifically, we're at a crossroads. What I will say that's been very positive in our city is Jarrell has done a great job of being a bridge to other organizations. The mayor often says, when he came in, is like, we're one of the most isolated cities as far as organizations in the world. Everyone's doing their own thing and no one's working together. He's brought people around the table. Organizations are coming together saying, what can we do about the problem? So I'm optimistic in the sense that I do believe the mayor wants the right solutions and wants the right things to happen, and he's getting the right voices around him, I would say. And so we're hopeful that we'll go in the right direction. I know that's the direction he wants to go. And a lot of things impact that. But for us, it's like we're going to keep doing what we're doing and have been doing for 70 years and making adjustments as we go.
So is it your assessment that on balance, we're at a 50-50 split right now in terms of addiction and treatment, in terms of the more or less? So we're right on the cusp of going one direction or the other?
On the easier to get high, it's probably going a little bit to the wrong direction. I mean, that's just my own personal opinion.
So
I don't have a lot of data behind that.
51% is your anecdotal. So there's still time to make adjustments, but if we don't,
I think so.
Momentum's going to swing.
And then it's coming around people. Jarrell talked about in his article, housing first is a really big push from the government.
Yeah, I didn't understand what that meant.
Yeah, so housing first is basically let's just get people off the street and put them into housing, which again is important, but housing first actually statistically has only worked for about 25% of the homeless population. What they've done with housing first is they put people in homes, but they don't put any wraparound services around them. Jarrell always says the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's community. We're really big on community at Light of Life. Like, we want you to have a healthy community to be a part of. Even if you're living in a camp, if you're with other people, it's still community. If you're in a camp with community and then you get pulled out and you're put in a house, it's great you have a house, but now you're alone and isolated, the odds of you making more poor choices, ODing, et cetera, go through the roof. And so what we would advocate for is what, I forget who called it this, but housing plus.
We had a guest recently, it was Vlad, who talked about the lack of social capital. I mean, he's an economist, so that's the language he put it in. But a lot of homelessness results from a lack of social capital. It's they don't have a network to rely upon. You know, maybe it's family or whatever that network might be that would enable them to get the help they need.
Oh, and that's why we have a street outreach team. It's the relationships. Because believe it or not, people do want to stay on the street. It's not like if you just went to every camp and said, hey, who's ready to get the services? Not everyone's going to go with you until we say the light bulb goes off. And for us, I don't know when the light bulb will go off. I don't know how long it'll take. But when it goes off, we want to have the relationship with you where you call and say, hey, Lloyd from Street Outreach at Light of Life, I'm ready. I don't want to live like this anymore. Can you help me? Can I come in for a night of shelter? Can I get into one of your long-term? Can you help me get housing? That's where the social capital comes in. And I think we need to do a lot more on the relational side. I always use the example. There was a guy that we helped. He was in the street. He was actually a mayor of an encampment for 17 years. He was on the street. And
the mayor of an encampment.
Mayor, yeah. They had their own system.
Mayor?
Yeah.
I mean, literally.
Yeah, there's leadership within camps. Not every camp, but this one. They had their own way of getting food and all these different things. And he never wanted help until one day, for whatever reason, he did. So our street outreach team was able to work with other organizations. We were able to get him housing on the north side. He actually volunteered with us for many years. It's like that's one example. 17 years on the street is a pretty long time.
Yeah.
But the light bulb went off and we were helping him get off the street, and he's now helping people that were in the same position he was. And so that, for us is the ultimate win.
So you have people in your organization that actually try to meet with folks in the encampment and try to bring them back into some sort of solution.
Yeah.
Is the problem now so overwhelming that there's so many of them and so few of you that it just can't?
I don't think so. Not in Pittsburgh. So that's where we're hopeful for our city. We're not at a point where it's like LA, where it's like, what is it, 60,000 or 100,000 people in
it's
Skid Row.
It's clearly not that many.
Yeah. So I would say that's where we're still hopeful. Overall in our county, if I had to guess the actual number, because again, the way they count isn't always effective, but I'd probably say there's 3,000 to 4,000 people experiencing homelessness, but again, that doesn't mean there's 3,000 to 4,000 people in encampments. That's people staying in shelters. That's people couch surfing with their family, staying in abandoned buildings that no one sees. But
your capacity to deal with it is what, a couple hundred tops,
right? And that's where we need other organizations, and that's where we need to grow and work. It's going to take all of us. The reality is, the city's not the answer. Light of Life's not the answer. Bethlehem Haven's not. Like, it's all of us coming together and trying to tackle it. So we may have different philosophies of care, but again, sometimes you need that, right? Like, Light of Life might be a great place for one person, but the other shelter down the street may be a great place for someone else. And so that's where it takes a lot of unique approaches and a lot of people coming around.
But in its totality, the system doesn't have enough capacity to deal with 3,000 or 4,000.
Right. And that's where I think we're looking for creative solutions.
So that's why you want the housing first.
Housing plus, I would say, yes.
Yeah, housing plus.
That's part of it too. It's going to take multiple strategies and multiple organizations all working together to really put it in.
And is that starting to crystallize? I mean, those organizations talking to each other and some sort of buy-in on the part of policymakers who are saying this is enough of a problem, we have to
I think the right people are at the table. Where they are in the process, I can't really speak to at this point.
How far does homelessness spread into the suburbs? Is that something that occurs, or is it mostly concentrated in the city?
It's probably more than you would think in the suburbs, but you don't see it necessarily. Someone experiencing homelessness may be someone who has nowhere else to go. They're couch surfing. Like, they're still considered homeless,
Okay. Because obviously the addiction and the drugs are going to be in the suburbs. Folks are doing what they can to hide it, but also many times it's celebrated. It's not hidden. My suspicion was we're not seeing homelessness in the suburbs, but that can't mean that it's not here.
Oh, for sure. And with the opioid epidemic, we're seeing a much younger population, a much more suburban population, just because of the drugs and how easily accessible they are. And
do suburbanites tend to migrate then to the city because of drugs? Yeah. Okay. And it just concentrates there.
Yeah.
Okay. This is not only a noble but a biblical endeavor to serve those who are addicted and enslaved by addiction and who become homeless. What is your sense of how the church intersects with all of this work? What does the church need to do to be helpful?
Yeah, I think they could do more. I know one thing in Joel and I's heart is to help equip churches to have their own shelters, whether that's on a rotating basis of like, could you turn in a part of your church to a shelter for a month and house 15 people? I think being educated is one thing. I think that's like you guys are having questions like, hey, what's really going on?
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are asking those questions. We get them all the time. As far as how churches can help specifically at Light of Life, so we have thousands of volunteer opportunities every year. If you've never been to the mission, we'd love to come give you a tour. And then obviously financially supporting the mission is always a huge blessing to us as well. We're primarily run by private funding, so individuals, churches, businesses, foundations. We get a very little government funding. We're very grateful for that. But yeah, asking the church, what can we do in our community? Is there a homelessness issue in our community that we don't know about or don't see, and how can we help with that? I think that could be a great charge to the church.
Well, let's talk about leadership, because that seems to be the other thing that
Sure.
you're very passionate about. You got this podcast, 3L.
What are the 3 L's again?
Learn, launch, and lead.
Obviously, that was an interest from the time you read Maxwell.
Yeah.
Why the fascination about leadership?
For me, I think leaders are the ones that make things happen. When you influence a leader, you're not just influencing one person, you're influencing everyone that person influences. And so
Sure.
I think it's the quickest way that you can make an impact in the world. And for me, I've just always related with leaders. That's who I like spending time with.
What kind of leaders are you trying to develop? Tell us about the 3L's.
Yeah, learn, launch, lead. Learning is all about personal development and growth. I don't think we ever have a finish line in our life where we've arrived or need to stop learning. And every level of leadership you go to, I'm in my 4th or 5th position at Light of Life. Every time I've stepped up in leadership, the learning curve there has been so huge. And so this is why, and peer learning is so important, getting mentors. I'm huge on mentorship. I talked about people showing me another way. When I started interning at the church, Larry, the youth pastor, would bring in leaders from the community, such as yourselves, and they would share with us. And after they spoke, Larry would say, hey, if you connected with them, you should ask them out to coffee and then bring a list of questions. And this is actually how the podcast started. He would say, you should come with a list of questions and ask them ahead of time. And he gave us this whole process, follow up with a thank you note. And so I started asking leaders out once a month I did it for 10 years. And after 10 years, all my peers started saying like, wow, you could spend time with all these cool leaders. I wish I could. I'm like, you probably could if you just asked.
Yeah.
You'd be surprised who will spend time with you. But that's when I saw an opportunity. I thought, well, what if I started recording my conversations with leaders instead of just me having coffee with them and share them with the world? And that's how the podcast was born. But again, learning. And then launching is, hey, at some point, you got to go to the next level. At some point, if you have a dream in your heart, you have to launch it and go for it. So that's what launch is all about. And then lead is just, how do you make an impact in the world? At the end of the day, it's great that if you learn and you have a great position in your organization, but what are you going to do beyond your 4 walls, whether that's your house or whether that's your church or your nonprofit or business, that's going to make a huge impact? And that looks different for everyone, but we really encourage people to ultimately go after their biggest contribution they can make with their life.
What are you currently learning?
About a year and a half ago, almost 2 years now, I got promoted to assistant executive director. So I went from leading a team to leading an organization. I'm Jarrell's only direct report, so I oversee the entire leadership team. It's the first time in my career that I've ever had to really take a deep dive into finance, take a deep dive into operations, take a deep dive into HR, take a deep dive into programs. That's a huge learning curve for me. I had opinions. This is really helpful. I had opinions of what I thought about all those areas and what we could do differently. But Jarrell was super helpful when I got into this role to talk about learning, because I was like, hey, I want to take a learning tour. I want to go in each department and spend time there. And he said, Doug, let me give you 3 beautiful words that you should lead with. First, he said, lead with curiosity. Here's the 3 beautiful words. Help me understand. Help me understand. And then don't say anything, just listen. Hey, help me understand. Like, why do we run the shelter like that? Help me understand why you talk to that person that, like, instead of me coming in and saying, hey, I'm just going to learn as much as I can. And then once I have a full understanding and I have buy-in with the team, then I can start to make changes with them, not to them. And so we're really big on, we call it do with versus do to. We don't want to just do to leaders. We want to do with them and come alongside, get buy-in and lead together. So I'd say that's probably the biggest learning curve for me, is learning organization versus the sales department.
How do you lead in a family?
Oh, yes.
You have 4 kids.
Yeah, 5th on the way.
When's your wife due?
January.
And what's your wife's first?
Laura.
Laura.
Yeah, I'm very passionate about this. So I'm married to my high school sweetheart. You guys heard my story. It took me 10 years to grow into the man I needed to be for her to say yes to me. I always say
She's smart.
Yeah, she's very smart.
Yeah.
So I'm grateful for that. We've been married now we're going on our 13th year of marriage, 5 kids. And my wife is an executive at a software company. So she oversees North America sales for a company called Evalua. And so we have very busy lives. A few years ago, we found this organization called Family Teams. They're based out of Cincinnati, Ohio. Guy's name's Jeremy Pryor. And they've really helped shape our whole philosophy on leading our team. And it's really seeing your family as a team. He had actually spent 2 years living with a Jewish family in Israel. And he said what he learned through that experience is Western culture will tell you it's all about the individual. Raise each of your kids as individuals, send them out to make their own individual contribution, and that'll be great. He said, but biblically, you'll never see that, and you won't see that in Jewish families either. What you'll see is this whole notion of a multi-generational family team on mission. And it's everything that every individual does is ultimately to come back and contribute to the family at large. Mm-hmm. And so it really gave me this vision of if we're intentional with leading our family right, why are we having a lot of kids? I read the statistic that if you had 4 kids, and a generation biblically is marked by 25 years. If you had 4 kids and each of those 4 kids had 4 kids and so on and so forth, over the course of 12 generations, which is 300 years, your family tree would populate the earth with more people than the population of New York City in the course of 300 years. Mm-hmm. And if everyone had this whole vision that got passed down of, hey, it's all about our family team, you could literally make major change. And he argues that you can make major change within 5 generations. If you really do it right, your family could have a huge impact running for office and all these different things. And that's kind of shaped our philosophy of why we want to have a lot of kids and how we want to lead our family team. As far as how we do it, honestly, like the number one tip I always give people is we have a weekly family team meeting. This also came from Family Teams. And so I hate it because I'm not a detail person, but I love the outcome. My wife and I meet every Saturday morning on average for an hour and a half, and we go through everything. We go through our calendar. We go through our finances. We go through our family. We talk about our marriage. We talk about our kids. We plan. And that keeps us on the same page and keeps us grounded and keeps our marriage healthy. In general, that's been a game changer for us.
How long have you been doing that?
It's probably been 5 years, 6 years. I mean, you guys have kids. I'm like,
yeah.
At some point, this all just blurs together. I'm like, what day is it? What year? But for a while, at least 5 years, yeah.
Yeah. Are you the leader of the family, or is it more you're the coach because it's the team, or how does that play out?
I view Laura and I as the leaders. We're the leaders of the family. We're the coach. And yeah, I mean, right now our kids are 8 and under. We see ourselves as, hey, we need to coach and raise these kids up to be awesome adults. Jeremy Pryor always says, don't parent for the next generation, parent for your grandchildren. And if you parent for great grandchildren, you'll parent your kids right. And that's always settled well with us.
Jeremy Pryor?
The founder of Family Teams.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
What place does the Bible have in this schema?
For us, it's essential to everything that we do. You know, we go to church every week. Every Saturday night, we try to have a Sabbath, a Shabbat meal is what we call it, and have it multi-generational. So we try to do a mini Bible lesson. And again, our kids are so young, but mini Bible lesson, and we reward kids based on their behavior and character. And so, you know, for us, like I always look at Laura's family talking about being modeled a different way. Laura can remember, and her siblings being 3 or 4 years old, and her mom always said, cast this vision of like, hey, you guys are going to be world changers for Christ. Like, you're going to change the world. And that's really what we want to do. Is like, we pray over our kids and we cast this vision of, hey, if you follow God, you're going to make a huge impact. And we're just believing God that you'll be world changers as you grow up. And we're doing our best to raise them that way.
Well, you sound like you're very interested in cultural engagement. You sound very optimistic. You can't be afraid of engaging the culture and therefore risking some level of conflict. You can be optimistic, but you also have to not be conflict averse. In your experiences with all the leaders that you've talked to, are those necessary qualities if you're actually going to be a leader that's going to see change? Do you have to have optimism and a willingness to get in the scrum a little bit?
Yeah, on the optimist side, I would say yes. I mean, what do leaders do? They provide a vision for a better tomorrow. I mean, at the end of the day, no matter what you're leading, hey, our team could be better today than it was yesterday. Hey, I can be better tomorrow than I was yesterday. Hey, our organization could be, our nation could be, that's by nature part of the definition of leadership, in my opinion. Yeah. On the optimist front. On the thick skin, this is the area. So if I had to evaluate myself, I would say historically, I've been all optimist. And the growth area for me in my 30s has been developing a tough skin. So when you say that, it resonates. And I don't know how this will play out. I felt like every year I do a year-end review. And then at the end of every decade, I do a decade review. And I write like these 30-page reports on my life. And when I turned 30, I felt like God spoke to me, said, Doug, in your 20s, I gave you a foundation to build your life on. In your 30s, I'm going to give you something to say. And in your 40s, I'm going to give you a platform to say it. So far, that's worked out. I always tell people that, hey, that sounds really nice. If I would have known what I've had to go through in my 30s to have something to say, I wouldn't have signed up for it. It's not been fun.
Right.
But we'll see how that plays out. But I say all that to say, I think God is developing a thick skin for me. And the things that I'm looking into now, I'm like, okay, I've hesitated to like put myself out there to risk. I care a lot about my reputation. I'm naturally a people pleaser, but I think that's the next level of growth for me. I've grown in it a lot in my 30s, but I think publicly doing that is gonna be a really challenging growth season for me.
Yeah, if you're going to have a platform from which to say something, you become a target.
Yeah.
Because you're elevated, everybody sees you, and everybody wants to shoot you.
Yep.
If you're going to actually be effective in moving the needle and casting vision and being a leader and helping people to be motivated to implement that change, it is coming after you.
Yeah.
And you have to be able to not only withstand it, to be able to stand. What you're envisioning in terms of where you're going requires the capacity to stand. I just love the way in which Paul talks about it in the epistles. I think it was in Ephesians. He just over and over again, stand. You know, having done all that you can to stand, now stand firm.
Yes.
It just says stand, stand, stand. And so this necessity to be unmovable in terms of a retreat, but also the capacity to advance requires a certain level of, I'll just say, toughness to be able to push through things and make a way forward. And
being an optimist, it's easy to think like I want to think that everyone will always think well of me and think the best of me. Like that's what I want, right? I've been listening to this guy named Patrick Bet-David. He's just really challenged me. There's this book I'm reading right now because of him called like the 33 Strategies of War. And it's like, man, there's some evil people out there who, you know, and the Bible says, man, we have an enemy that comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And that's a reality. That's true. And so I think the optimist in me has to also deal with the realism of, hey, life isn't this warm, fuzzy, everyone's great. Those things are happening. And I'd say the one thing that's really helped me in my 30s, I had the opportunity and privilege of having lunch with John Maxwell. And I asked him about this people pleaser thing, because this was me, especially in my mid-30s. And he said, Doug, I had the same problems you did. And my CEO, Mark Cole, had the same problem. And he said, I came to Mark one day. I said, Mark, the good news is you're a great leader and everyone loves you. The bad news is your leadership isn't good enough to get them where they need to go or the organization because you care too much about what they think about you.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, what do I do with that? And John's like, I had to make the decision early that I would always love people, but I would not depend on their love. I would say it again, because that changed my life. I will always love people, but I won't depend on their love. And for me, what I recognize in that is part of the reason I'm afraid to put myself out there is because I'm way more dependent on the love and admiration of others than I like to admit. And hopefully I'm speaking for a lot of people, but that's a real challenge for me. But in the times where it has gotten tough and I had people speaking against me, that's really helped. It's like, well, hey, I'm going to love you anyway. And
I was a people pleaser too.
Were you really?
I had that same problem.
What'd you do about that?
I grew up. I grew up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Say more.
It's not my podcast. It's yours. But
well, you had to go through some. You had a.
Well, I got. I have a story that I
Listen to
actually
his-
did
listen to
share.
his
I was
podcast.
episode 100.
Yeah. He tells his story.
Yeah.
Okay.
You had to go through some pain.
Oh gosh, yeah, enormous amount of pain. I think that's actually my wife and I have been engaged in the periphery of Light of Life for a long time. It's got to be at least 25 years.
Wow.
And we've been giving it for a long time, and we've been doing the food collection here for a long time. That's kind of the predicate for the question I asked earlier, which is I think people who have had enormous change in their lives, and I am in that category. Everybody's story is different, but I'm definitely in that category, have had to face themselves, have had to look in the mirror, have had to do a very, very candid assessment of who they are before God, and, have that metanoia moment of I'm going to either choose life or choose death. And I had that very profoundly in my life. Not really wanting to face reality about what you are doing. The slap story that you told, the people when I had difficulty who figuratively slapped me, I didn't have anybody physically slap me, but did that to me, were far more beneficial friends than the people who said, oh, you're fine, you're doing well, you're walking
You're
with
discovering
the Lord.
yourself or
Yeah,
something.
all that crap that you learn is crap. And the person who told it to me straight and said, this is where you are and this is where you need to be, was a far more beneficial friend than people that want to please you. And that is a predominant sin. It is very, very hard to speak truth into people's lives.
Yeah.
I have learned, hopefully with wisdom and through God's grace, that ultimately is what brings about learning and launching and leading.
Yeah.
You cannot ignore your own sin.
You don't realize how much the darkening effect of sin can be on your mind.
For me, that is one of the big learning curves that I had from leaving Tom 1.0 to Tom 2.0 in my life. And I credit God's grace, Jesus Christ, with that change. But Light of Life has always had a special allure to us, Louise and I both, where the change element is so front and center at a place like Light of Life. When you get to the precipice of hell, you have no other choice but to change. I've been there personally.
Another thing I'm passionate about, I think will add value to listeners, is we talked about this. I think leaders hit a point of pain, and usually some point in their journey, and if they can either, like you said, go the healthy way or unhealthy. And if they go unhealthy, my pastor told me once, he said, I think only about 2% of Christian leaders actually make it to their finish line intact and actually fulfilling the call of God on their lives. And that, as a young 20-something, always scared me. And so I'm really interested in longevity. For me, it's all about community. So I lead one of the mastermind groups I lead. I call it a pastormind. There's 13 of us, all ministry leaders in our city, pastors. And the vision for this is that every leader needs a community in which there are three things: fully known, fully loved, and fully challenged. Fully known means, hey, I have a place where I can show up and share my stuff. I can share the worst of me. And number two, I'll be fully loved, just like that youth pastor loved me and said, hey, you've fallen, it's okay. But then also fully challenged. Sometimes I don't need a hug and a high five. Sometimes I need a slap in the face, literally or figuratively. And that's what this group does. And so we've been meeting for 3 years. And to see these guys come together, it's been a beautiful thing. We've cried together. We've laughed together. We prayed together. And one of the guys that was sharing with us, we brought in a pastor from Florida that mentors me. And he said, guys, when you're struggling with something, like, you don't have to tell everyone. You don't have to go on a podcast and confess all of your sins, but you do have to tell someone. He said, the people you need to tell are the people in this group right here. Why? Because they couldn't care less. And it's because they couldn't care more. Man, I found that to be so true. And to see these guys that we've been meeting now for 3 years, every one of them has come to me in tears saying, I didn't know how bad I needed this group. It was like, what did you need? And at the end of the day, it was friendship. And I think leadership can be so lonely sometimes. And so that's what I encourage. Like, it's so rare to have someone speak the truth and love to you, like you said. But if you, as a leader, unless you intentionally seek that out, it's rare that it's going to happen to you. So I don't know what you guys did to intentionally seek that out. But for me, it's been that group and through mentorships that I have found giving people an open voice to speak into my life anytime with anything that they see has been super fruitful.
And the best friends have that. That slapping incident that you described, what was the pivot point for your life?
And I'm talking about 20 years later.
You look back on it and you say, this is the most beneficial thing that ever happened to me. One story I told on my podcast was my relationship with Jack Welch, okay? Supposedly the greatest manager and executive in the history of, and I wrote a book about him. And
don't read his leadership books.
I've read one. What's that called? It's yellow.
No, it's
been a long time.
At any cost. It was the contrarian view of Jack Welch. But Jack Welch, he threatened to sue me 12 times. In the course of the book I was writing about him. It turned out that those incidents in my life, I gave God great thanks for bringing that to me, because it was the fiery furnace that I needed, that was a pivot point in my life. And so
and you're going to make me listen to the podcast to get this whole story, right? Like, I interview people all the time. I have like 30 questions. Anyway.
Well, do what you wish. Thank you for sharing your story.
It's a powerful story.
Yeah, I'm glad he slapped you.
Thank you. Thank you both. And thanks for scattering seeds all over the world through this podcast.
Thanks for littering.
You said it. Yeah.
And keep up the good fight at Light of Life.
Yeah.
Say hi to Hutch, too.
Yeah. He's everywhere. I've never met a volunteer that's not their number one staff member.
Yeah. Well, he's a past podcast, I guess, too.
You had Hutch.
We went to Light of Life.
Yeah, we did.
And did the podcast
2 years ago.
I think I do remember this.
2 years ago.
Yeah.
So, quick story to end on. Hutch, if you don't know Hutch is one of our graduates in our program.
Yeah.
And he is on staff now. He works in our kitchen. He's phenomenal. One of the greatest people. We had a podcast for a short period of time at Light of Life. Kind of like you did at the end, like, hey, is there anything else you'd like to say? And Hutch goes, well, I don't know if I'm allowed to do this or not, but if there's any single ladies out there listening, I'd love to take you out for a burger. And he started going through this whole pitch. Oh, it was so beautiful. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to find him a wife yet. But so if you're a single woman out there listening,
great man named Hutch.
Hutch, I love you.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Doug. God bless you.
I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Now there is in store for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award me on that day. Paul spoke those words to Timothy near the end of his time in ministry. It had been a long road and a hard one, filled with trials, tribulation, and moments of pain. In fact, as he was writing this second letter, he was sitting in a prison cell in Rome. But Paul was content because the Lord had sustained him. During the interview, Doug brought up the statistic that many who are in leadership positions in the faith, whether it be pastors, nonprofit workers, or other positions, tend to burn out, sometimes before the work is fully done, leaving the task to others. Even the prophet Elijah passed his mantle on to Elisha. So how can a leader keep going through the fiery trials? How did Paul? First and foremost, it comes through the acknowledgement that we can't without Christ's power. Sometimes we get so caught up in the desire to fulfill the call and to please those we are serving, or to please the Lord, that we start drawing on our own strength to do it. And sometimes we start overdrawing from our own strength to do the work, rather than resting on the Lord and standing in faith. We have the promise that faithful is He who calls us. He will do it, and I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Jesus himself told us that our role is to be a branch that cannot produce fruit unless it is drawing from the strength of the vine. So acknowledging that we can't carry things without Him, and being content with the reliance on Him that produces in us, is a large step forward towards actually being able to be resilient enough to walk the paths laid out before you. Another step is surrounding ourselves with others who are pressing on to the mark of the high calling. Elihu was the last of Job's friends to speak, but he was the one who pointed his friend back to the Lord. It was a bit of a proverbial slap in the face, though sometimes you do need a friend who will give you a physical slap in the face too, though that is thankfully much less common. Either way, this journey is not one we were ever intended to complete on our own, and out of our own strength. After all, God himself told Paul, "My strength is sufficient for you." So don't despair if the path is hard. It's a chance to root yourself even more strongly in the Lord, who is your strength to do your call and your shield against the enemies along the way. We are called to do great things, whether it's to lead one dying woman to the Lord, or to feed hundreds who have nothing else over the holidays. Each of us has a purpose in God's grand design. And we have the God of the universe ready to step in and give us the strength we need to obey Him. We just must surrender our striving and our ambition. But as Paul said, that's how we gain Christ. And a relationship with Him is worth the laying down of every accolade and plan that we can come up with. So my question, dear listeners, this holiday season is, are you ready to rest in His strength and let Him lead you all the way to the end of your race? He's waiting for you. If you want to know more about how to start a relationship with Jesus or how to grow in your faith, you can contact our show at info@thescatteredseedspodcast.com. Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Scattered Seeds Podcast. We hope to have you back next time on the show, where every life has a story.
Well, hey, leader, thank you so much for listening to my conversation from the Scattered Seeds Podcast. I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did. You can check out the Scattered Seed Podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts, so I encourage you to do that. I also want to thank our sponsor, Andosha Marketing Solutions. They are the producers of this podcast, and if you are looking for help with your organization's marketing, I cannot recommend them enough. You can check them out at andosha.com. That's ANDOCIA.com. And as always, leader, I like to end every episode with a quote, and I'll quote Jim Rohn, who said this. He said, "The challenge of leadership is to be strong but not rude, be kind but not weak, be bold but not bully, be thoughtful but not lazy, be humble but not timid, be proud but not arrogant, and to have humor but without folly." Love that quote. Well, that's going to wrap up today's podcast. As always, remember, leader, don't quit. Keep leading. The world desperately needs your leadership. We'll talk to you next episode.